Hi all, my name is Dr. Sarah Saska. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Feminuity. And today I'm going to be talking about the unintended consequences of different types of technologies. So for many of us, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the faster deployment and uptake of many new technologies, right? Tech is keeping us connected in new and different ways. And for those of us whose roles lend themselves to working remotely, it's also enabling us the ability to continue to do that work. And it seems that in times of crisis, we often lean even more on technology. And as we witness an increased global understanding of systemic inequities, right, systems that have been broken for far too long, along with the increased global demands for racial justice as called for by the Black Lives Matter movement, and those working in solidarity. We're also witnessing companies, many for the first time, showing interest in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion related efforts within their organizations. So in real time, we're seeing organizations, scramble to host trainings and educational endeavors. They're looking to do really fulsome company assessments, and they're looking to build company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And many are actually looking to technology as that veritable silver bullet to assist them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion related efforts. So in real time, we're also witnessing the rise of diversity and inclusion technologies, right? So tech that's aimed at helping us to solve complex forms of inequity within the context of the workplace. So technologies that are helping us determine who gets hired, who gets fired, who even sees a job ad in the first place, who gets paid and how much, and even who gets promoted, just to name a few. And so while I don't know if diversity and inclusion related tech can actually, solve for all of these inequities within the workplaces, I do know that we have a really good shot of enabling the next generation of different types of discrimination. So whether that's ageism or sizeism or racism or sexism, right? We don't need explicit forms of exclusion and discrimination to be sexist or racist or ableist. Because we need to remember that technologies rely on us and our data in order to be built, right? Technology is not more objective than people. Technology is merely an extension of us, of our collective histories, right? Because technologies are built by us and they are built using our data sets that reflect our histories of exclusion and discrimination, the good, the bad, and the everything in between. And the same tech is shaped by us on an ongoing basis, right? So it's also a reflection of our current behaviors. So if we consider Microsoft's AI bot, Tay, right? This hit the news some time ago, but in less than 24 hours of being live on Twitter, Tay started to spew racist and anti-immigrant, misogynistic, and transphobic slurs that had learned from its users. So our collective histories, right, the good, the bad, the everything in between, from hate and discrimination to prejudice, they were coded into Tay's DNA through the use of our data, but also how we engage with Tay in real time. So artificial intelligence and machine learning are really hot topics in the data science world. But despite their popularity, they're often confused or simply misunderstood, right? AI is an umbrella term for the technologies that attempt to approximate human intelligence. So AI is about machines being able to carry out tasks in a way that we would consider to be smart or like us, right? Having human abilities. Machine learning, on the other hand, is an application of AI. And what it does is it provides systems with the ability to automatically learn and improve from experiences without being explicitly programmed. So machine learning uses algorithms. And algorithms, at their core, are simply a set of instructions that tell a computer how to perform a task. And so machine learning uses algorithms, that set of instructions, to analyze data sets and to predict future behaviors. So machine learning are algorithms that learn from our data. So while these are really hot topics and often give the guise of objectivity, we have to remember that technologies are an extension of us, whether through our bias training data or through how we use them, through our habits and through our questions, right? We're the foundation and we continue to shape them in real time, right? Even think about the search questions that you input into Google on any given day. So today I want to really quickly talk about three sort of major areas where we're seeing technology really be utilized to resolve or solve for diversity, equity, inclusion related challenges in the workplace. So I'm going to chat about recruitment and screening tools, tools that are impacting pay equity, and how facial recognition is even impacting us within the context of our working lives. So some of you all may recall Amazon's resume screening tool. So about a year and a half ago or so, in an attempt to solve the problem of bias and discrimination in recruitment and to make the process of sorting through job applications more efficient, Amazon built an AI resume screening tool. Cool, seems simple enough, right? Ultimately, Amazon wanted something that was more objective and more efficient. But what they quickly realized is that the system was screening out resumes from women. So Amazon's recruitment tool was screening out resumes with the names of women's colleges, or even if a woman was a member of a chess club, and that was listed on her resume, for example. So why was Amazon's resume screening tool being sexist? Well, the screening algorithm was built using resumes that Amazon had collected over the past decade. And as it turns out, those resumes were largely from men. So in this way, the very foundation of this tool, right, the bricks, the foundation that it was built from, the training data in this case, was biased, right? So the screening algorithm mimicked the biases that it found in the data set, just like how, children pick up habits from adults. So in an attempt to solve the problem of bias in recruitment and to make the process more efficient, Amazon ultimately designed a solution that was far more biased, and it created a whole new slew of problems. And what was, I think, less prominent in how this example was taken up in the news is that the programmers who developed the screening tool actually tried to edit the algorithm in an effort to make it be more objective. So in this case, to be more gender neutral, or at least not sexist. But ultimately, the programmers concluded that neutrality simply wouldn't be possible for this tool. So in the case of Amazon, the data set they used to train the technologies was tainted by the ability bias, which resulted when developers used the data that was readily available to them, i.e. those decades of resumes that were largely from men. And further, these systems can be biased based on how we're using them, right? How we're interacting with them. So after all the time and money that was put into this project, right, to solve the problem of bias in recruitment and to make the problem of sorting through job applications more efficient, ultimately Amazon had to scrap the tool. And so in my take, this is an all too telling corporate admission that even when you're one of the most well-resourced companies in the world, you cannot engineer objectivity. So I'd say Amazon's screening tool is only the tip of the iceberg, right? All across the business world, we've seen companies who are adopting predictive technologies in the hopes of eliminating different forms of human bias. So this can also occur even before someone applies for a job. So the step before the resume screening in the instance of Amazon. So if we consider, for example, ZipRecruiter and other job boards, the type of job boards that aim to understand recruiter preferences and that aim to solicit applicants that match them. So these systems are set up to make predictions based on patterns in user behavior, and they update dynamically as employers and job seekers interact. However, if the recruitment practices have a pre-existing bias, such as say hiring predominantly, white, cisgender, non-disabled, heterosexual men, for example, the algorithm will look for proxies of these types of characteristics, of these types of, aspects of people's identities, right? So for example, like someone being named Jared, or having a particular affiliation to sports or STEM, perhaps. And ultimately, when these algorithms look for proxies of characteristics, they end up replicating these patterns in the recommendations that they share. So this is another example of how technology in this instance can actively contribute to the exclusion of other groups. And in this instance, folks won't even be considered for an opportunity. And so once a company makes that hiring decision, predictive tools are also used to help determine what sort of offer to even extend to a candidate. So if a data set shows that women often make less money than men at a company, as an example, or if racialized women make less money than white women, as an example, right, something we know to be true, then ultimately the algorithm will identify these types of pre-existing patterns, and they'll end up perpetuating these pay inequities in the offer that it actually proposes to the HR and people leaders to extend to candidates. So even more worrying is that if this operation remains unknown, right, to hiring teams and applicants, it can actually circumvent laws that are actually working to protect equal or equitable pay, right? Because again, under the guise of technology, we assume that such a tool will be objective and be helpful to us. And so if we don't question that tool, these types of inequities can actually end up being deeply exacerbated without us even realizing. So technologies like these that intend to make things easier can actually fortify existing biases in the recruitment pipeline, in the hiring process, and so forth. So these same types of algorithms, like that of Microsoft's bot Tay, are used to, in the way that Tay became sort of spiraled out and became sort of a misogynistic, white supremacist bot. We also know that facial recognition ends up, coming up with problems for us in the context of the workplace. So the image here on the screen, it depicts two individuals on Zoom. So, and what you'll notice is that on the left, one individual's head actually appears to be cut off, whereas the individual on the right, their head appears to be fully intact. So this example is from within the last week or so. Ultimately, Zoom's face detection algorithm erases racialized people's faces. So in this instance, this individual is a Black person. And so Zoom's algorithm determines that an individual who's white or fair or with light skin is easily detectable and obvious. So while the Zoom example is perhaps somewhat innocuous, we know that issues with face detection algorithms extend to areas as consequential as law enforcement, right? A sector that's already rife with brutality and racism. So just to give you a little bit more sort of color and texture around that, right? We know that in Michigan, a grainy surveillance image from a shoplifting incident led to the wrongful arrest of an individual. Ultimately, the image provided a false positive, which the individual who was arrested by the last name of Williams was ultimately able to disprove just by holding the image up to his face in the interrogation room. So MIT and the National Institute for Standards and Technology have proven that while facial recognition technologies work relatively well on white men, as an example, that they are far, far less reliable on people from other demographic groups. So in this case, a Black man. So facial recognition technologies, along with their worrisome gaps in detection efficiency due to the lack of diversity of images in their databases, are ultimately depriving people, particularly people of color, racialized people, of due process and they end up amplifying an issue that has already sparked worldwide protests, right? Systemic racial injustice. So artificial intelligence in this way is fast becoming the arbiter in conflicts of extreme magnitude, right? Of guilt versus innocence, and likewise incarceration versus freedom. So the case of Williams, the individual that I just described, it got some press, but consider how many other folks have fallen victim to these types of erroneous matches and are actually now behind bars because of it, right? Most likely people that had even less resources and even less power to push against illegitimate and unethical policing practices. So in other words, those at the most at the margins in our world. So while this example may seem like wild divergence from diversity and equity and inclusion in workplaces and the use of technology, I really don't think that it is. Right? We know that folks are much less likely to hire folks who have any type of criminal history or criminal record. Right? So this is a whole area that we really need to be a lot more conscious about. But beyond that, we're also witnessing in real time with the shift to remote work, an increase in surveillance with organizations, ultimately because they're demonstrating a lack of trust with their employees who are working from home. So in real time, we're witnessing algorithms being used to assess worker competence via microaggressions and micro expressions that display after they're asked a question in the context of a meeting, say. And it's already been shown, right, that technology interprets emotions differently based on race, right? So we already know that facial recognition software and algorithms can barely recognize racialized people's faces, but now we're actually using it to determine if someone is a good employee, if they're working well from home, right? If they can be trusted while working remotely. And this, to me, is really unnerving. So, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the faster deployment and uptake of so many new technologies, especially for organizations, right, who've made the shift to remote work. So now more than ever, we need to be so vigilant about the technologies that we use and choose to engage, right? Those that impact our lives in ways that we really, truly, many of us don't understand as of yet, right? We cannot let the promise of AI overshadow real and present harms to people. And the efficiency and the scalability of technology means that they can reproduce existing inequities at scale, right? And ultimately at warp speed. So I like to say this a lot, so I will say it again today, right? We can't resolve inequities with zeros and ones, right? We need to be intentional with how technology shapes the world that we live in and how we harness it, because it has immense power to change things for the better or for the worse. So Facebook's original motto when they first launched, many moons ago, was move fast and break things. But my question has always been, right? How does such a motto account for the systems that are already deeply broken, or the people that are already deeply hurt? Right? We need to do better, and we need to take a different approach. So what I would argue is that in terms of how we think about moving forward, one of the best things to think about is that we need a yes and approach, right? A tiny sliver of the population should not be able to design and build technology that impacts the majority of the rest of the world, right? According to the AI Now Institute, research, a recent study found that only 18% of authors at leading AI conferences are women, and more than 80% of AI professors are men. Women comprise only 15% of AI research staff at a company such as Facebook, and about 10% at Google globally. And about only 2.5% of Google's workforce are Black folks, while Facebook and Microsoft are each hovering around the 4% or so range. So these are leading tech giants that are shaping society as we speak, and their workforces are profoundly unreflective of the diversity of the world that we live in. That's something that we all really need to be thinking about, right? This isn't just sort of some easy argument like, let's get more folks in the door, right? This is for a really critical mission. And I think what else is really important is that even once we get more people in the door, right, if we have diversity of people who, with a diversity of backgrounds shaping and designing the technology that impacts us all, we also need to do more than that, right? Even a diverse team of developers can be coerced into creating stereotypical and biased technology that ultimately ends up reinforcing inequities if they don't possess any representation in company leadership, right? If they don't feel empowered. So it's not a simple solve in that way, right? This is about getting folks in the door and also working to build more inclusive and equitable organizations so people are empowered to make good decisions. So I'd say, we all have a role in this, right? So where are my artists and my creatives, my storytellers, my designers, the innovators, the maintainers, right? Before today, I think some folks might have thought, you don't have a role in this conversation, but you do, right? We all do. We all need to have skin in this game, right? Because ultimately our brains are the largest piece of technology that we have. And we all need to be part of shaping our collective future, especially as it relates to technology and innovation. We can't let amoral markets that prioritize profit over social good supersede our responsibilities to one another, as well as our future. Right? We have to work toward creating a more just world that thoughtfully considers how innovation will impact those who are already made vulnerable through ongoing histories of marginalizations, right? Histories that are being reproduced through the ongoing discriminatory coding and technological abuses that we're seeing happen in real time, right? We need to do better. We need everyone to have voice in this process. So since our inception, our mission has always been to make better things and to make things better for everyone, right? We believe that technology and innovation can allow us to build better things, right? Like products that are ethical and inclusive and accessible, and that ultimately meet the needs of a diverse and global customer base. And we also believe that we can make things better for everybody, right? Through ethical forms of technology and innovation, and through designing workplaces that allow people to not just sort of survive on any given day, but actually thrive. And I'd say our mission is more important than ever before, right? Companies can't go back to how things were, pre-COVID-19 pandemic. But I think companies can be a lot more thoughtful and take advantage of the energy and momentum that's coming out of these times, right? People are having bold conversations that are needed more than ever. So ultimately, we believe that technology will be most powerful when everyone is actually empowered by it. And that's the kind of world that I want to see.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those examples of technologies that enable the next gen of exclusion and discrimination. We now have time for some questions. Are you ready for that, Sarah?
Yep.
So, audience, feel free to ask questions. And we'd love to hear from you. I've got a few questions for you, if that's okay. It's absolutely pleasing to see, all the initiatives tackling discrimination and exclusion. Sarah, where do you see this movement heading, and how is it evolving?
I think the thing that I'm really just the most unnerved about is the idea of leaning so hard on sort of tech-centric solutions for very, human-centered problems. It just feels deeply ironic, right, that we're highly aware of sort of, the complexity and sort of the downside of AI and ML sort of generally and sort of what that looks like, right, because they're ultimately just designed by humans. And so in real time, watching organizations just sort of look to diversity and inclusion related tech solutions as a veritable silver bullet is really unnerving. So I just want to see a lot more, more complexity around the conversation.
So what would like a tech solution hand in hand, look like to maybe overcome some of these risks and biases that you present or you find?
I mean, I think that's the problem, right? It's just that we need to stop looking at technology as this, uber objective thing, right? Like too often we're turning to tech as, the alternative because humans are sort of deeply biased, deeply busy, and just sort of generally overwhelmed. Um, and I just think we need to help, sort of the average person who doesn't understand sort of what goes into the back end of the development of these technologies to understand just how fallible they really are. Um, that would be a really good starting point. Really, sort of unearthing or opening that black box to help people who are not technologists, who are not technical, to really understand what goes into this.
So what's something you found that surprised you, or is important, that we should be aware of, that we might not be aware of?
I ran through my talk, right? Like where organizations are looking to technology for, screening resumes, everything from promotion to how much people get paid, right? Like we're unearthing sort of all of the inequities that are being exacerbated through these technologies in real time. I think pay equity is a really good example, right? People assuming that, hey, we'll let this algorithm determine, what this new hire should be paid, and no one questions it in real time. And then we actually watch organizations actually sort of breach like legalities in terms of pay equity in the organization because they simply were letting, a piece of technology sort of take over under the guise of objectivity. I think you're muted.
My apologies. Okay, back on. So we got a couple of questions I think we might have time for. Can you share some examples of how your organization has been working towards making technology free from discrimination? From Newport, thank you for that question.
Yeah, I think like the Amazon example really demonstrates that the developers who are part of the resume screening tool ultimately, like after they recognize like the deep-seated sort of gender bias and presumably like countless other biases that the screening tool was revealing, they quickly realized that with a bunch of like intentional work that there was no way to actually make the screening tool more objective. Data training sets are a huge component of this, but in real time we shape technology by virtue of the ways that we use it. So I think from our perspective, like we really want people to understand that there isn't a perfect solution right now. So for us, it always needs to be a yes and, right? Like, yes, we need to be intentional with our data training sets, right? We need to broaden those. We need to diversify, the people who are at the table who are shaping technology in real time, right? From designers to technologists and beyond. And then we also need to develop more intentional ethical protocols, right? About, the end-to-end process of how things are designed, but also like what types of things we can actually design for and what things we can actually rely on to make decisions in lieu of, humans. So from our perspective, it's like a multi-pronged, ongoing sort of active solution.
And any final takeaways you would like to share before we say thank you and
I think in real time, if you're an organization that's really looking to be intentional about diversity, equity, inclusion related efforts right now, I totally understand that, budgets are tight, like constraints are real, but start with your people. Don't lean on technology as your first point of contact, because people have a lot of the solutions and answers sort of within them. So I'd say start there until we figure out some better solutions in this field. And we have like regulations there too.
It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm going to say bye to you for now.